There we go. This might be net worthy.
It might be a 5-6 pound fish.
Good grief. Jeez, man. It's probably a bass. No, it's a little pickerel. Look at that.
Over the past few years, as many of you know, I have become addicted to ultralight fishing. Now, I love ultralight fishing because it gives me the ability to catch numerous species of fish all on the same piece of equipment, but in addition to that, every single one of those fish fights harder. Bluegill this big, pike this big, it doesn't really matter. If you catch them on an ultralight rod, it's pretty much always gonna be a good time. Now, the other thing that I've been doing over these last few years is I've been experimenting with a lot of techniques. And today I wanted to share with you 5 ultralight techniques that I think all anglers should know. If you become an expert of these 5 techniques, I think you will very rarely skunk because they pretty much cover down on everything you need as an angler. Now I'm gonna start with my least thrown technique out of these 5, and then I'm gonna move up to my most thrown technique out of these 5. But like I said, I really think it's important to have all 5 in the arsenal, because if you do, you will basically be set up for any situation across all 4 seasons. So with that being said, let's get started. Number 5, the float rig. Now just to clarify, when I say float rig, I essentially mean any technique utilizing a float or a cork or a bobber, whatever you want to call it. These are classic right here. We've probably all caught a fish underneath one of these little red and white circle bobbers, but it can become more advanced than that. Essentially what's beautiful about these techniques is it gives you the ability to present a bait vertically without having to be right on top of the fish. So, first example, you've got a slip float. Now, if you've been watching my recent videos, you've seen me utilize this, but that's a bobber stop right there. And what's beautiful about this rig is when you have that slip float and you've got that bobber stop, that stops it exactly where you set that bobber stop. So you can fish really deep water with something like this, but present your bait exactly at the depth that you want it to go. So as an example, if you are fishing in 30 foot of water, but you see there's a school of fish 10 feet down, you can set this bobber stop at 10 feet and cast out your jig, and then have that jig hovering right in the middle of those fish. A lot of crappie anglers, a lot of bluegill anglers utilize these techniques right here, and I can tell you this one is tried and true. You can't really go wrong with this little technique right here. The next one that I like as well is a peg float. Now I like the peg float a little bit more for shallow water, especially in streams and creeks, when I'm trying to present something really small and have it just tick along the bottom. The peg float, you basically pull this little peg out and then you can set your float exactly where you want it. So it's quick to adjust. So the slip float is also quick to adjust, but I find that with a slip float, you need to use a little bit heavier gear to get it to ride properly, whereas a peg float, you can use pretty light stuff. So I find that this is really effective when I'm trout fishing. It's very, very similar to utilizing a strike indicator with like a nymph or something when it comes to fly fishing. This is basically fly fishing with ultralight. So you could honestly fish with flies underneath this and catch a lot of trout doing so. But those are the 2 ways that I rig a float because they really cover down on all the situations I need. Whether I'm fishing deeper water for panfish or I'm fishing shallow water for trout, creek chubs, or other, creek panfish, whatever it may be, these 2 techniques right here are great, especially for cold water. Now, let's move on. Number 4, ultralight jerkbait. When the fish are smashing one of these, I can tell you with confidence that you're gonna have a blast on the water. These things right here are so unique because they are one of the few techniques with ultralight that you can fish really aggressively with. I love little ultralight jerkbaits when it's windy conditions because a lot of times with other techniques, you have to be a little bit more slow and methodical, and it's just a little bit harder to utilize those other techniques when there's a lot of wind blowing. So an ultralight jerkbait, it gives you the opportunity to keep moving your bait and fish a little bit more aggressively. So basically anytime the fish are aggressive and chasing bait, a lot of times in the wind, this thing comes out of my box and I start chucking it around. Now, what's beautiful about one of these is they actually come available in 3 different options. You can get them in sinking models, you can get them in floating models, and then you can get them in suspending models. So depending on the conditions for you, I would choose accordingly. Now I've got some of all types, but essentially I usually use a floating model because I fish a lot of shallower water around grass. I don't want a sinking model because if I'm fishing over a weed bed and it sinks down in there, it's going to snag up a lot of times. So a floating model can come down to the weeds and then it'll float back up, come down to the weeds and it'll float back up. So for me, floating tends to be great, but if you're fishing a lot of deep, clear water and you want to count it down to the depth the fish are sitting at, a sinking model can be great. Ultimately, there's an option for everyone. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is these all pretty much come stock with a split ring on the front, but a lot of people also choose to do a loop knot for them if they don't have a split ring or if they just want a little bit more action, because the loop knot gives it a little bit more free ability to kind of slash back and forth. So I'll show you how to tie one of those right now. Today I will be demonstrating on a Rapala Original floater. The loop knot is pretty simple. You start by forming a loop. Just like you're tying an overhand knot, you're going to just bring that tag end right through your loop, and then you're going to start to tighten it down. You don't want to make it too big of a loop. I like to tighten it down to a very small little loop, big enough to where you can still work with though. You then take the tag end and run it through the eyelet of your lure, and then you pinch that loop with your finger and you go ahead and wrap it back around your main line. I usually go 4 or 5 times, and then I will go ahead and push the tag end back through the loop that I already formed. Now, you have to kind of take a little practice here, and you kind of have to pinch all the line at the same time, but then you run it back through the top loop that is formed as you start to cinch it down.
Different than a wrap.
And then once you do that, it's actually pretty simple. You just kind of keep things steady, and you go ahead and tighten down both your tag end as well as your main line, and you're going to form your knot. And as you can see, I made a little bit too large of a loop knot there, but for demonstration purposes, it works. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what knot you tie. You can pretty much fish it the same way, whether you're tying to the split ring or with a loop knot. I just wanted to share it with you because it has been something that came in handy for me in the past. The other thing is there's lots of good brands out there, but some of my favorite ones would be Rapala, Yozuri, as well as Rebel. These are all tried and true brands, and I have a lot of them in my box, but there's probably lots of other good ones out there, so feel free to experiment and let me know if you find something that you like, and I might just do some more experimenting and pick some up. Number 3, micro drop shot. I used to be a hardcore bass fisherman, fished a lot of tournaments, and it's funny because a drop shot was always one of my best friends as an angler. I was super confident in this rig. Well, what I've realized is that an ultralight version of it can be just as effective for other species as well. This rig is really simple to tie. All you have to do is tie a Palomar knot to your hook, leave a long tag end, and then attach a weight. What's beautiful about this is it gives you the ability to hover a bait right off the bottom and basically fish nice and slow. I love to fish these in deep water, but you can fish them in shallow water as well. Personally, I love about an 1/8 ounce weight in most cases. It seems to be very versatile and I have a lot of confidence in it, but you can choose one that, you know, feels right for you. I also have found that this Hayabusa finesse drop shot hook in a size 8 is really good for like bluegill and whatnot. You can obviously adjust the size of your hook based on what species you plan to catch, but this one's been really good for me with regards to ultralight fishing. As far as rod and reel goes, you can pretty much fish it on any ultralight rod and reel that you want, but I have found that a little bit longer rod is something that I like because it gives me the ability to move that line if I'm fishing deep water. So in this case, I've got it rigged up with a 7-foot ultralight. all in all, this technique right here continues to grow on me, and I think that as I fish more deep water, this is going to continue to be, you know, thrown more and more often. But this is definitely one I would highly recommend for all anglers. Number 2, double jig rig. You've been seeing me fish with this rig a lot more recently, and quite honestly, the more I fish it, the more I love it. The double jig rig is awesome because it gives me the ability to experiment with bait size and color and quickly determine what they're going to be eating that day. If you can just cut down on a few minutes of determining what color they like best, that will result in a lot more fish. So I really like that. The other thing I love about this rig is it gives you the ability to basically mimic a school of bait fish. That is virtually impossible with any other rig as far as ultralight goes. If you're a bass fisherman and you throw an Alabama rig, you can mimic a big school of bait fish, but that is so heavy and there's really nothing like it for ultralight fishermen besides the double jig rig. So I've really liked that, and I honestly have a lot of confidence that it has drawn a lot of fish to me because they think that there's numerous bait fish in the area. If you fish a single jig, that's fine, but it doesn't necessarily give them the appeal of numerous moving through the water column. As far as how to tie it goes, I've found a knot that I like, which is right here. The reason I like this knot is because it's really simple. All you gotta do is run your line through your first jig and make sure to leave a nice long tag end. Once you have that set up, just double your line over and form a loop. And then once the loop is formed, all you gotta do is run that jig through the loop 3 times before cinching it down. Now you wanna make sure you kind of pinch that line and keep it tight to the jig. But what's beautiful about this is that it forms a little bit of a loop knot and it keeps your jig off your main line, which I actually think gives it better action. And then with the other tag end, you can go ahead and just tie your favorite knot. Palomar. What I think is awesome about this rig is I've found there's really no wrong way to fish it. I have fished it aggressively over shallow water and I've caught fish. I've fished it slower over deep water and I've caught fish. Typically, a lot of people fish it for crappie with heavier jigs, but what I've found is light jigs fished shallower and fished more of a horizontal approach works just as well. I am experimenting with this more and more every time I fish it, but all in all, I think this is just a dynamite rig, and I pretty much have one rigged up at all times now. Number 1, jig and plastic. So I know we just talked about a double jig rig, but even better than that is a single jig and plastic. Now, I know that's obviously a very broad term, but what I mean when I say a jig and plastic is a small ultralight jig, anywhere from 1/80th of an ounce all the way up to like 1/4 of an ounce, and then a small plastic, usually less than 3 inches long. The beauty of a little ultralight jig is the fact that it's extremely versatile and you can basically catch fish in all conditions. I've caught fish in the dead of winter, I've caught fish all through the summer, spring, fall, it doesn't matter. Honestly, an ultralight jig and plastic accounts for probably 90% of my fish catches on ultralight. Now, as far as choosing a plastic goes, I would say pick something that is going to mimic the local forage for you. Personally, I fish a lot of minnow shapes and a lot of insect shapes because that tends to be the primary forage for a lot of the fish in my area. But let's say, for example, you're fishing a body of water that has a lot of small crayfish. You might choose something that looks like a small crayfish because that might actually work even better for you. The other thing is I like to have numerous colors available because what I've found with ultralight fishing is some days they're crushing chartreuse, some days they're crushing pinks and purples, some days they're crushing white or black. The list goes on. Ultimately, colors can certainly make an impact, and that's part of the reason I love the double jig rig is because you can use 2 colors, hone in which one they like better, and you can either keep fishing a double jig rig with 2 of that one color, or you can just fish a single jig with that color. And sometimes a single jig draws a lot.
Fish USA is America's tackle shop, and it's where I gear up for all of my adventures. Now, let me tell you why. For over 20 years, Fish USA has...
Yo, what's poppin', Team Dink? Here we are at the pond, and today I am ultralight fishing. You know I love ultralight fishing, but one of the questions that I get all the time is what is the best line for ultralight fishing? Well, obviously there's about 1 billion different types you could choose out there, and there's really no right or wrong answer. But today I'm going to fish with monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braid, and I'm gonna talk about some of the key advantages of each. And then at the end of today's video, hopefully you can pick out the one that's gonna work best for your needs. And I'm also gonna share the one that I personally like best. Regardless, I could sit here and ramble all day, but what I really wanna do is catch a fish. Let's get started.
Okay, I've got 3 ultralights with me today. One has monofilament, one has fluorocarbon, and one has braid. I'm gonna start with the one with braid, and I'm gonna talk about what I like and don't like about braid, and then we're gonna move to mono and fluoro. I just still have this Donkey Tail Junior rigged up from my last trip. One thing to point out is you can see that there is 6-pound braided fishing line right there, but obviously I have a leader as well to cut down on visibility. And I think that's going to bring me to the first thing that I really like about this is the fact that this braid is highly visible. So it's super nice when it comes to detecting bites. Being able to see that line twitch left, right, whatever is such a key way of detecting bites on light gear. That being said, it's also kind of something that I don't like about it because you always have to deal with tying a leader on there. And sometimes on the water that can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. Now I will say this, when it comes to bass fishing gear, I always use braid to a fluorocarbon leader on my spinning rods. But with ultralights, I like to have that lower diameter light line that's not super overpowered. And so that's why I went with the 6-pound here. I know a lot of people use 10-pound as well, but I felt like 10-pound would just kind of overpower my setup. So I don't personally like that for ultralight fishing. There's nothing wrong with using it though. As far as casting distance goes with braid, I would say it does pretty good. Once it gets wet, it definitely does better than when it's just like fully dry. But all in all, I think I do actually get a little bit more distance on my monofilament or my fluorocarbon.
Probably.
There's a fish. Oh, I got him. There we go. There we go. What do we got? Bluegill? That would be a bluegill. We're on the board. Excellent. He kind of bit that while I was dead sticking it. He chomped it. There we go. Just a little gill. Now, historically speaking, I've used other braids as well on ultralights, and I will say this, I did not like lower end braid. This is the newest Fireline, and honestly, I've had pretty good experiences with this. It does get some line twist from time to time, but it hasn't been too bad. One of the other things about braid that's really nice is it has absolutely zero stretch, which leads to more sensitivity. There's a fish. That's got to be a bass.
Dink, dink.
Yeah, that's got to be a bass. Oh yeah, just a little dink, but man, I tell you what,
yep.
Ultralight bass are always fun. I love it.
Oh, sure.
Man, he was kind of dogging me. He had some fight in him. Well, we got 2 fish on the old braided setup. Not going to complain about that. Here's a small disadvantage, but it is a disadvantage. My line sometimes wraps around my rod tip, and that's always sketchy because if your line wraps around your rod tip and then you go to set the hook or something, you're going to snap that rod tip. I'm trying to think about anything else that might be relevant to talk about when it comes to braided fishing line on ultralights, but all in all, I'd say I pretty well summarized it. It's more sensitive, it's easy to detect bites because you can see that line. You probably sacrifice a little bit of casting distance, and you're probably going to get a couple more tangles in that line from time to time, but all in all, I think if you buy a high quality braid, you can't necessarily go wrong. I'm going to go ahead and switch from my braided setup to my monofilament setup. Here's my monofilament setup. And on here I actually have a Rapala Countdown 01. Has one little tiny treble hook on there. This thing's dope.
Okay. 7.
Oh, I can bomb this thing. Oh my gosh. Now when it comes to monofilament, it's obviously a much softer line and it's got some stretch to it. So you're not going to get that same level of sensitivity that you have with braid. But I will say this, a low diameter monofilament casts so far. This happens to be 2-pound test. I've also used a lot of 4-pound tests. Both are fine, but I will say the 2-pound I can get significantly more distance with it. You know, one of the other key advantages of monofilament is it's very budget friendly. It's inexpensive.
Of course I don't.
I'm using a little bit higher end monofilament. This is Trilene Sensation, but I can get 330 yards of it for like less than $10. So I'm a big fan. I think we can all agree too, when it comes to light line, you're probably going to go through line a little bit quicker than some of the heavy stuff, because obviously it's lighter and it's more prone to damage. And so I would say, you know, you got to be cognizant of what you're spending your money on. Also, when it comes to monofilament, obviously one of the things I like is the fact that I don't have to use a leader, because obviously it's clear. This 2-pound mono is basically invisible. I will also say that I technically do like high visibility monofilament too, some of the stuff that's really bright yellow. And the reason is because I can detect bites a little bit better with that. That being said, I do prefer clear these days. I just have more confidence that it's going to get bit better. Oh, he chased it all the way in. All in all though, as far as a summary goes with monofilament, I don't think you can go wrong. It's inexpensive, it gets the job done. I don't have very many issues with it.
Egged them on to do what they were supposed to do in the basement.
But I find with that low diameter monofilament, I just don't get that much line twist. So I have not had too many headaches with this stuff. As much as I want to catch a fish on this thing, I am going to put it up for now because I feel like a slower moving presentation is key in this colder water. That being said, like I said, monofilament, it's a great option. Now let's get to fluorocarbon. Last but not least, let's talk fluorocarbon. This happens to be 2-pound fluorocarbon.
Here?
Like to try to move that thing out, like would you...
Today?
Yes. To drive?
Yeah, I'll drive anywhere. I don't care.
I'm like, I don't want it happening, but I feel like we just need it to happen or it's gonna
Whatever.
not, and I want it out.
And it's actually a high-end fluorocarbon. It's a Daiwa Samurai. I'm currently throwing a 1/80th ounce mule jig with a Donkey Tail Junior on there, but this one's all black. The one thing that you have to remember when you're throwing something this light is it's going to be really hard to cast on a lot of setups. But because this line is absolutely the lowest diameter of all three, I'm definitely going to be able to throw it quite well. Fluorocarbon is low stretch, but it's also super low visibility, and it's definitely the lowest diameter. So this is basically like Barbie hair, man. Now, because it's low stretch, it is sensitive, but one thing to keep in mind is it's going to be more brittle than monofilament. Monofilament has stretch, and so even though it's a 2-pound breaking strength, it's not going to just snap. This, on the other hand, doesn't have the ability to really stretch that much, so it's probably going to snap a little easier than a monofilament would. Oh, nice little pumpkin seed, dude. Oh, by the way, I'm fishing with my buddy Tyler, TF in the comments. That's a beautiful little pumpkin seed right there. I mean, I'm getting some really solid distance on this extremely light jig. And that all comes down to the low diameter. That's one of my biggest tips when it comes to ultralight fishing. If you want to use a short rod and you want to use light stuff, you really need to go with a low diameter line, whether that's braid, mono, or fluoro. Low diameter will help you get so much more distance. Now, it obviously will cut down on the strength of the line, but I think as long as you have your drag settings proper, you're gonna be fine. Anyways, to summarize fluorocarbon, I will say this. It is obviously really nice, but it's just like braid in the sense that you kind of get what you pay for. If you buy really cheap fluorocarbon, especially in this low diameter stuff, you're probably not gonna have a great time with it. But if you buy the high-end stuff, you're gonna be just fine. There's a fish, there we go. There we go, beautiful fish too. Oh my Lord, look at the colors on that. Donkey Tail Junior catching me an absolute donkey. Pinned the tail on the freaking pumpkin seed donkey though. Look at them orange fins though. My Lord, that's picture worthy.
Right where it splits here, he's got the teal blue
I like
to him.
that.
I love that.
He's talking about like kind of right in here, that color variation's real nice. All right, guys, I tell you what, that is a beautiful fish, but we're gonna go ahead and let him go. Oh man, that was a faint bite. I was just drifting it, and I think that's where that fluorocarbon really comes in handy. It's very high sensitivity, it's low stretch, and I just had to pop him real quick, and it worked. Oh, there's a bass right in front of me. I think I spooked him though. We'll see. Oh, he's coming to get it. He's coming to get it. He's coming to get it. There, he's got it. Yes! Sight fished him. I'm telling you guys, sight fishing with ultralight gear is one of the most fun things ever. He's just a little dink, but he's a gorgeous fish. All right, might be a small fish, but I love it. I love seeing them bite, man. It's so fun.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm having a ton of fun out here. The Donkey Tail Junior is working. I'm honestly catching more fish than I expected to, but ultimately I hope that so far you're better understanding